Louis, thank you very much for joining us on City Reflections. Can you tell me what made you take this direction of being a photographer?
I'm not sure. It's one of those questions you always get to ask photographers, isn't it? Not sure. I suppose most photographers, I was given cameras by my parents. Both my parents were trained in art college. They weren't photographers, but they were always interested in photography, and we always had old SLRs, old-fashioned Zenits, Nikons, big chunky silver and black things growing up. So I played with them, and then began to study it at college and university a bit later.
Louis, so you've traveled to many countries to take photos. What are these countries mainly?
I suppose the last 2 years or so, I've spent most of my time in working in West Africa and the Middle East. Sierra Leone, Gambia, on the west coast of Africa, and then predominantly in Lebanon, Jordan, those regions in the Middle East.
Let's take some. Let's go through some of the photos you've taken. I want to ask about the people in these photos and their stories, and if you can tell me like any special incidents. So let's start with the first one. You know, I see a man trying to cover a woman with some white cloth. What's the story behind this?
Well, this photo was taken in Sierra Leone in 2014 at the height of the Ebola crisis, and that was my first big story, I suppose you could say, covering the work of a particular relief agency, aid agency, and how they responded to the Ebola crisis. And this particular photo was one of the healthcare workers, you know, that became so iconic in that era. You know, all these pictures of people wearing PPE and you know, the protective masks and things like that. This was one of those workers, and I chose this photo to show you guys just because to me it really it symbolised that whole level of determination that had to be mustered to overcome that crisis. And you know, I'm not sure how much press it got over here, but a lot of these guys weren't professionals. You know, they were effectively volunteers. They were often the surviving family members of people who died of the virus of Ebola, and they would come in. They would do a really brief, you know, 2, 3, 4 days training in how to wear the equipment, to spot the disease, and then they were in there and they were fighting on the front line. And as I said, you know, these were not professional people. You know, they were just people who wanted to make a difference for one reason or another. Usually it was because somebody they will have known will have died of the virus, which was an awful lot of the population. You know, I mean, you couldn't meet somebody who didn't know someone who'd been affected. Usually they'd be affected to the tune of 3, 4, 5, 6 members of their family dying, because that's the really awful thing about the virus, is it's not so much a killer of individual people as it is of families. It preys on people's affections in a way, because you get the virus, the person becomes ill, you care for that person, and then you catch the virus, and then the cycle goes on, and in that way it can hollow out an entire family very quickly.
You know, it's a very big risk to go somewhere like there, and you know, I mean, you know, you have a person who has Ebola in front of you, but you still, you know, went there, and you're actually very close to her, and you took the picture. So isn't it a very big risk that you're taking?
Well, you're always aware, of course, you're always aware of the possibility that you could catch the virus, but there's lots of procedures put in place to keep you safe, and I had a lot of trust in the people that I was working with, in the procedures around me to keep me safe, and you had round-the-clock supervision. There was always someone to speak to if you had symptoms or something like that. I mean, I did have had to go into quarantine for about 48 hours when I had an elevated temperature, things like that. But that was just as a procedure. I mean, as I said, they have all these mechanisms around you to keep you safe, and one of those things is they treat everything very seriously, even if it seems quite trivial. And if you have any kind of symptom, they look after you. And I suppose I've always wanted to see things for myself. I've never been quite satisfied by just seeing things through the television, through the newspaper. I've always wanted to see it for myself and make my own judgments and see how things are for myself. And that takes you to places like this, because you know, with a story like the Ebola crisis, it was such a huge story, and it was always mediated through to you and to us as viewers, as an audience, by other people, and I felt like I wanted to just see it for myself and make my own assessment of how things were going, and to bring that back ultimately to other people. Yeah, I suppose that's why.
So now we move into the next picture. I see a mother, I guess, with her little baby. Where was this picture taken, and what's the story behind it?
This was actually also in Sierra Leone, but 2 years later. This was last year in July. And this, I really wanted to go back to Sierra Leone to see it in a different light. I mean, when I'd been there in 2014, it was a completely different country. You know, there was a lot of fear, a lot of tension in the air, and I felt almost duty-bound in a way to go back and see it in a different light, see it in a different way, and bring that back, and to see how things were recovering afterwards. Because, you know, problem with a lot of journalism, or the problem a lot of people have with journalism, a lot of critics of journalism, is that we're there when the story happens. When the story's over, we leave, and there's no follow-up. There's no conversation about how people survived, how people recovered, how people are coping, and that was why I wanted to go back.
Ebola is over 2 years after.
So this is about 2 years after. This was in July 2016, thereabouts, and it was about after the Ebola crisis. There'd been a big spike in teenage pregnancy, something like 47% increase in teenage pregnancy, single mothers, because during the Ebola crisis, all the schools were closed, and all the children, young children, were not in school. They were not supervised, and every girl's story was different, but it ended up in there being a lot more single mothers, a lot more children being born, and not having the support networks around them, and this was a story about how some of these girls learned to cope for themselves, how they supported each other. This particular photograph was of one young girl and holding this baby. It's not her baby, it's a friend of hers, and they come together 2-3 times a week and just hang out. I mean, it's very, very simple. They just offer a bit of support, and they talk about their own circumstances to each other, offer each other solutions, and take care of one another, which is something that they don't often get back home in the households that they've come from, because there's a huge stigma attached to being a single mother in Sierra Leone still.
All right, so in the next picture I see two kids. So where was this photo taken, and tell me the story about it.
This photo is more recent. This was from a few weeks ago in South Sudan. So I went out to South Sudan a few days before the UN declared that it was officially a famine. We'd gone out there to report on the worsening crisis and to encourage international action on trying to prevent what was about to become a terrible crisis. And so we'd gone out there to see the situation as it was pre-famine, but actually as we were out there, the criteria that needs to be met had been met, which is that an awful lot of people were dying from hunger-related illnesses. You know, a certain percentage of the population, I think it's something like nearly half the country, more than half the country, 5.5 million people are affected by the lack of water, by the lack of food. And this is not a man-made crisis because the drought has been going on for several years now, but it's been exacerbated by man-made scenarios and actions elsewhere. I mean, the country's in states of civil war. A lot of the aid that's going into the country is being misappropriated and corrupted and used for other things, to fight the war, to wage the war. And ultimately it's people like this young girl and others that are affected because the money that should be coming to them as aid isn't reaching them. And I mean, this young girl, these two young girls I should say, were here in a medical centre because her younger niece was so severely malnourished. She'd lost so much weight that she had to have round-the-clock care. Her mother had already died from hunger-related illnesses, and the older girl, who was still very young, she was only a teenager, was her aunt, and she'd taken her there and was living there to make sure that she was safe and to make sure that she got better. But she was relying on round-the-clock care, and that's unfortunately now the scenario for more and more people in South Sudan. As I said, something like 5.5 million people.
Okay, the next photo, a little girl, she's writing, or she's reading. I think she's writing something. Where was this picture taken, and what was the story about this picture?
So this photo was from about 18 months ago. This is from Lebanon, and this young girl, teenage girl, is a Syrian refugee who's fled from the civil war and was staying in Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley. And this girl, I mean, I wanted to show this photo to you because it really sort of summed up sort of the tragedy, but also the will to overcome that a lot of these people have who fled the war. And this young girl, she was 16, and what had happened to her, as it happened to a lot of teenagers, was that the war's been going on 6 years now. I mean, when I was there, it was the 5th anniversary. They've lost 5 years of their education. So if she's 16 now, she left when she was 11, or the war started when she was 11, and that's 5 years of education that's just been knocked out for her, and she can't get that back. And educational provision in the refugee camps in Lebanon is minimal. You know, it's mostly for young children, for 5 and 6 year olds, and it's not really specialised in the way that you need to teach teenagers. So for a lot of these teenage boys and girls in the refugee camps all over the Middle East, but particularly here in Lebanon, it's something they feel that they've lost. And this young girl, every day she would write in this book, and to her, this was her way of trying to just explain her situation to herself. And she said something to me which sort of stuck with me, which was that she'd read that education was like a weapon, and with that weapon we can fight and we can make ourselves better. And that's what she was writing in the book at the time. And you know, it was that sense of, yes, I've lost something, but also I've got a will to try and overcome that in my own way.
I guess the next picture next to it is, I think, the same place. Was it the same place? Can you tell me more about it?
So this was the same story. This was in the same refugee camp, but this, obviously, as you say, is a teenage boy, and I just wanted to show both of them so you could see from both sides. This boy, similar story. He was about 16 years old, and same story. He'd lost out on a lot of education, but as is often the case for the boys, for the men in these situations, they have to work. So I mean, even if he'd had the opportunity to go back into education, he wouldn't have been able to, because he had to work to provide that extra bit of money for the family. And so he was working as a baggage collector, as a porter in a nearby town, and it was backbreaking work. You know, they'd be there from 6 in the morning till very late at night. You know, it took me an awful long time to actually meet him. I'd seen him leaving in the morning and coming back very late at night, and I said, I wanted to have a conversation with you and take his portrait, but they had to work so hard that this was very difficult. But he was, as I said, still very optimistic. He still had a bit of hope in his heart, which was nice to see. And he talked about his love of being a dancer. Actually, that's what he said he liked to do in his spare time was to dance. So yeah, very much like the last photo. It was. They both speak to me of an element of tragedy, but then the strength to overcome that.
We have a photo here with a lady wearing hijab. Where was this taken, and what's the story behind it?
So this photo is a portrait of a woman, a very special woman called Jahar Doucouré, who is a Gambian American young woman, and she is or has been a campaigner against FGM.
This Adhan is brought to you by Orphans in Need. Let's bring them hope for a better tomorrow.
عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا سمعتم النداء فقولوا مثل ما يقول المؤذن.
On the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, whenever you hear the adhan, say as the mu'adhin is saying.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة
اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد.
O Allah, owner of this perfect call and owner of this prayer to be performed, bestow upon Muhammad al-Wasila and al-Fadila and send him upon a praised platform which you have promised him. Verily, you never fail in your promise.
This Adhan is brought to you by Orphans in Need. Let's bring them hope for a better tomorrow.
Gambia, and they were visiting a town where there's a very high prevalence, a very conservative town, very high prevalence of FGM, and she was interviewing this woman who was the head of the local women's council, and they were having a debate about why this is something that shouldn't be practiced. But I also wanted to show this photo just because here you can see the kind of the diversity in cultures within the country. You know, you've got a young liberal, internet savvy journalist here on the left, and you've got sort of the older conservative side of the country, which tends to be more rural, and all these other women listening and taking part in the debate, which is something that I found really fascinating. You know, everybody was engaged. It wasn't an exclusive exercise at all. Everyone was included, and you can see here you've got women in the hijab, you've got women in the full veil. Everyone was involved in that discussion, and I thought that was something that I found very impressive.
Lastly, all these stories, do they leave any impact on your life, any mark in your life?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, I mean, as I said, there's a lot of tragedy in here, but there's also a lot of hope. Jaha particularly is somebody I've stayed friends with, and she's one of the most inspirational people I've ever met. And so there's a lot of inspiration I can take from these, as well as the tragedy in it. As I said, there's a lot of inspiration, and I try to take that from it. There's a lot of hope in here, and I hope I can bring some of that back.
Thank you very much, Louis, for your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This program is funded by the Dawah Project subscribers. Hijaz Travel Limited. Over 12 years experience in the Hajj and Umrah industry. 2017 non-shifting Hajj packages from £5,395 with 5-star accommodation in Mecca and Medina. Flights from Heathrow, Birmingham and Manchester. Also providing tailor-made Umrah packages suitable for all budgets. Book now for an early bird discount. Visit hijaztravel.co.uk. Atoll protected and Ministry of Hajj approved.
K Furniture's Bank Holiday Sale is now on. A wide range of high-quality furniture available at unbeatable prices. for all your home needs. Up to 70% off with immediate delivery. Hurry, offer ends soon. Visit us at our Cricklewood, Harrow and Hatch End branches or order online at kfurniture.co.uk. This is Mohammed. With your generous donations, he was able to memorize the Holy Quran through UKIM's Hifz-ul-Quran project. This unique program of Hifz is dedicated to support and teach young children just like Mohammed to become Hafiz, guardians of the Holy Quran. Please visit ukim.org today, and with just £29 per month, you could sponsor a Hafidh-ul-Quran, a never-ending sadaqah jariyah for you and your family.
Ilma is an exciting Islamic lifestyle e-magazine exploring religion, spirituality, social issues, health, culture, world cuisine and style. With a global readership of over 100,000, Ilma is now available to download as a brand new app on your tablet or smartphone. You can enjoy all this fantastic educational content from the palm of your hand. Ilma magazine brought to you by the Dawah Project, spreading Islam through digital media. For more information and advertising opportunities, please call 0207 330 1744.
Introducing Migo and Ali, Love for the Prophets, a brand new book by Zainab Mian. Explore multiple stories about the prophets of Islam, from Adam to the final prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in 164 glorious pages with full color illustrations. Suitable for children aged between 4 and 12 and published by Muslim Children's Books in partnership with the Dawah Project. Order today by visiting muslimchildrensbooks.co.uk.
Did you know that over 300,000 children die each year due to drinking unclean water? Clean water should be a basic human right, but so many people around the world lack this basic need. With your support, Tiba Foundation is working to end their suffering by providing water hand pumps and clean water systems around the globe. Donate now by visiting tibafoundation.org and help us save lives.
There is great reward in building a mosque for Allah's sake. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever builds a mosque for Allah, Allah will build for him likewise in paradise." Tiba Foundation's new initiative to build 99 mosques across Pakistan, Sri Lanka and Rwanda is already underway, but we need your continued and generous donations to help us complete this noble project. Each mosque will be named after one of the names of Allah and will help to serve the local communities in the poorest areas. Donate today by visiting tibafoundation.org or call 020 7330 1744.